let's talk about your gender could be introducing suggestions that they would not ordinarily have in life.
So I think the research shows that like they can actually, that most of the time they end up just going back to their original gender role.
Yeah, why?
So,
Why do they end up going back?
But what's the harm with
But
social
why do they end
transition?
up going back? You just made my point for me. Why do they end up going back?
Because it just wasn't the right
Because it was based around suggestion.
Andrew Wilson takes on a leftist pushing trans ideology in this fiery debate and doesn't hold back. With sharp logic and a single pointed question, he completely shuts down the argument and leaves his opponent speechless. Watch as he exposes the flaws and stays unshakable under pressure. Let's dive in.
Research advances, our diagnosis capabilities actually improves. And just as you say that there's this explosion of everyone being trans, there's some people also argue, oh, there's this explosion of people having ADHD. Oh, there's this explosion of people having autism. You don't think it's possible that our diagnosis, ability to make diagnoses actually improved? And also just the fact that like our attitudes toward different gender behaviors and expression has also changed.
Well, actually, no. I would
have
to counter this by saying no. Okay. I think the opposite is true. As the science has gotten better, as more and more people have been looking at this issue, our ability to diagnose has not improved. In fact, it's just as inconclusive as the day we really started to go down the path of trying to identify these various gender issues. Everything from brain scans being inconclusive, and they are quite inconclusive, to the science you're now citing being inconclusive. Now, you brought up a pretty, I think, is a fair point, right? Let's look at the idea of, something like autism. Something, there's a lot of kids who are diagnosed now with autism. But the question here becomes, is that even a fair diagnosis, right? Is it the case that they're being diagnosed with autism and they actually have it or not? Well, a lot of that's inconclusive too. So we have to be very careful, right, when we go down these different pathways. But I will say that there's more science, at least, that would affirm the idea that you're autism, or that you have autism, than science that would affirm that your brain somehow maps onto that of a brain of a woman. There's not any good conclusive evidence for that. None. Zero. So the question I have for you is just this. You're a materialist. As a materialist, how can you make the claim that the wrong soul is stuffed into the wrong body? You would have to make the claim instead that you're developing along the pathway that you're supposed to be developing along. There's no other way around that. So if that is the case, as a materialist, why is it that we should affirm any of this with inconclusive science? Why?
I'm not saying it's conclusive, and I'm saying my argument is that this should be an option. As
why?
This could be one pathway.
Why
because
should it be an option? Work. Yeah, but it could also not work. But it also could not work. And if it could not work, it could do amazing amounts of damage, even from a utilitarian worldview. It could do huge amounts of damage to block a child's pathway to puberty. Like, I can't even think, like, can you imagine your dad comes into you one night and he says, we're going to block your pathway to puberty. And you go, well, that could be helpful. I'll grant it. Maybe it could be. But you have to grant the other way that it may be extraordinarily harmful. If that is the case, we don't make medical decisions that way. You need to have, you need to give me some degree of certainty here. Some degree of certainty. You know, when I take an ibuprofen, I have some degree of certainty that shit's going to get rid of my fucking headache, okay? I need something. Give me something.
I just want to say...
Hang on. Let him respond. I don't want him to feel like he's railroaded. The 2v1s kind of suck. You know, I get it. I don't want you to feel railroaded. Please answer my question, sir.
I don't have a response.
You don't have a response.
I just want to say, me and Andrew are taking the passive position that we shouldn't allow people to mutilate their kids. Because of that, the onus is not on me and Andrew to prove anything. The onus, I think Andrew and Classy would agree, is on you guys, the proponents of child mutilation and body mutilation to prove that there is overwhelming evidence that justifies it. You have not done that. You have tacitly admitted you can't. And I just want to reiterate, you are taking the extreme position that we should be in favor of mutilation. Me and Andrew are taking the position that we should not do that. Because of that, the onus is on you to provide overwhelming evidence, and you can't. And you've also admitted that trans-identified men are just men and they're not women. And I think that sums up the debate and answers the questions.
But you're misrepresenting my view. I'm basing my view based on the guidance from the Human Rights Campaign, which doesn't recommend surgical intervention for minors. It recommends that if they do have gender dysphoria, to explore the social transitioning and also possibly puberty blockers. So no, I don't support genital mutilations, and I will support restrictions on surgical intervention for minors.
I do want to just to be sure that Classy, you feel like you've gotten to say everything you wanted to say?
Yeah.
You got it. Pardon my interruption, Josh. I know I'm being like extra protective. I just want to be for sure that he doesn't feel like he's not getting enough time. Go ahead, Josh. Pardon my interruption.
I would just say, I will assume arguendo what you're saying. We will say no transition, no invasive surgery, but just what you're arguing for hormones and talking to the child about it. I would argue.
I'm not advocating for hormones for minors.
What are you advocating? Talking to them about gender ideology?
Talking to them about the possibility of exploring the possibility of social transitioning and possibly puberty blockers. But I'm not advocating for hormone. You understand there's a difference between puberty blockers and hormone replacement therapy.
I do understand that. I have a very simple question for you here.
Sure.
Have you ever heard of the Salem witch trials?
Yes.
What was the demographic of people who were the most likely to give false testimony?
Was it possibly the women? I could be wrong.
It was the children.
Children, okay.
Why? Why did the children have fantastical tales to tell about witches?
Because they are prone. Because they're
You're getting close.
I know what you're getting at.
Can you tell me why it is that you think that the children were the most likely to give false testimony?
Because children are susceptible to
suggestion
ideas.
Yeah, suggestion, ideas. You can convince them Santa Claus is real. You can convince them werewolves are outside the door. You can convince them of everything under the sun. And those of us who have children know this very well. So I need to ask you again, if you have no conclusive scientific data and you're giving this suggestion to a child that the child may not be what the child thinks it is, then you perhaps could be creating a suggestion that child may never have had. Yes?
Let me know what you think. Do you agree with Andrew Wilson that it's crazy to risk so much without any certainty it will work? He completely shut down the leftists' argument earlier with one simple question, and the guy literally had nothing to say, total concession. Andrew goes further, asking for suggestions, and the reality is eye-opening. I've spoken to professionals who work with children in these sensitive areas, and here's the thing. When you ask a child the same question repeatedly, they start to doubt themselves. Over time, they might even change their answers just to please the adult asking. It's a psychological trick that can create a false sense of reality. Relying on children in this way or expecting certain outcomes from these methods has been shown to be highly ineffective. Anyone with common sense can see it. You can get a child to believe almost anything, but that doesn't mean it's accurate or reliable. If you're enjoying this breakdown, smash that like button and hit the notification bell. Let's get back into it.
But I don't see what is the harm of social transitioning if they can very easily reverse back to whatever gender role or
which means they're not women.
They had before.
Well, they're not women. They're just boys. So you just admitted they're not women. If they can
some of them are just going to be boys, but some of them may end up to growing up to be transgender women.
You said they could very easily go back to being boys, so it's not that harmful.
If they don't have gender dysphoria, or if the social transitioning isn't working out for them.
And is Santa Claus real?
No.
How hard would it be for you to convince a child it was?
Well, they would have to either grow out of it or,
grow out?
How hard would it be for you to convince a child that Santa Claus was real?
I don't know. It depends on the child. It depends like on how.
If you had to guess,
they
just
are
give me
about to
your
nurse.
best guess. Give me your best guess.
Depends on the age too, right? Because like some children are like really young, they probably won't be able to change. If we're talking about like maybe
Yeah,
5,
give me
6,
your
7,
best
8.
guess, bro.
Again, it depends on the age.
Do you think that you could convince
Depends on the.
Do you think you could convince a 10-year-old Santa Claus was real?
Could you convince a 10-year-old that Santa Claus is real? Maybe.
It would probably be a lot easier than convincing a 40-year-old.
I would think it might be a little bit easier.
Yeah, 30-year-old.
Might be a little bit easier. It depends on the culture
18-year-old.
also.
18-year-old.
Well, it depends on the culture too. I mean,
Which, okay, well, we're talking about the culture that
in.
we're in. We're talking about the culture
Okay.
we're in the United
Okay.
States. Do you think it's hard to convince a 10-year-old Santa Claus is real?
It's possible. Yeah, they could.
Is it
Yeah,
hard to convince a 10-year-old Santa Claus is real, sir? Give me the real answer. Come on. Don't bullshit me. How hard would it be to convince a 10-year-old that a big fat guy who has elves in the North Pole flies around all year and goes down the chimney and leaves Christmas presents under your Christmas tree? How hard is that? It can't be hard because almost every child in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s believed that bullshit. Almost all of them believed it because kids are totally suggestible. So the question becomes, how much of this that you're talking to your child about becomes suggestion? When is it that they think, well, daddy thinks I'm a girl. Daddy thinks that I'm not correct. They look to you for guidance. You can convince kids of insane shit. In fact, I'll give you a story. Very quick story. It's an anecdote. You can dismiss it, but very quick story. Fucking with kids is hilarious. Okay, don't get me wrong. It's really, really funny to convince them of shit that is absolutely not true. Like, for instance, one time, it was one of my kids was about 5, and I was like, "Don't go down into the basement." She said, "Why?" And I said, "Because if you go down there, a vicious, evil monster is going to eat your face, and I'm going to laugh because I was the one who told you not to go down there." And she was like, "Fuck that. I'm not going down to that basement." Was there ever a vicious monster in the basement? Of course not. Of course not. Did I find it hilarious that I was able to convince this 5-year-old of this? Did I pat myself on the back? Absolutely. But the point is, you can convince kids of all sorts of irrational, nonsensical things. Their minds are like sponges. So I need to ask you, if you take into account how suggestible kids are, don't you think if you have inconclusive science that you as the parent, by just simply saying to them, let's talk about your gender, could be introducing suggestions that they would not ordinarily have in life?
So I think the research shows that like they can actually that most of the time they end up just going back to their original gender role.
Yeah, why?
But
why do they end up going back?
But what's the harm with
But
social
why do they
transition?
end up going back? You just made my point for me. Why do they end up going back?
Because it just wasn't the right
Because it was based around suggestion.
Andrew Wilson's story about how easy it is to influence kids really drives the point home. You can get children to believe almost anything. And when you think about it, the same kind of manipulation is used in extreme situations, like indoctrination by radicals. It's a chilling reminder of how impressionable kids can be. This also ties into the broader debate about parenting and influence. Andrew points out that a lot of the chaos we see stems from irresponsible guidance and suggestion. And it reflects the kind of reckless behavior by some parents, especially on the far left, who let these ideas take root in the first place. It's wild, but it shows how messed up some of these extremes really are. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What did you think of Andrew Wilson completely dismantling this leftist argument? If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.